Hello once again, friends, neighbors, fellow Christians. Welcome back to our ministry here at What the Bible Says. And welcome back to another video in this series where we are debunking Unitarians. And I so deeply appreciate you watching our videos, studying along with us, leaving comments, and sharing our videos. Please don't forget to smash the like button as well. And if this is the first time that you are viewing our channel, I hope that you will subscribe. Click the little subscribe button, click the bell icon to turn on notifications so that you'll receive a notification every time that we upload a video. And help us in this work where we're not asking for your money, we're asking for your intellect. We want you to study God's Word in its context. Okay, and so we're going to get into our next it's not a video, but it is an article, and this is where we are debunking Unitarians. And this article was presented to me in discussions with one of my friends, Colin Reese, and I kept presenting Hebrews 1 and verse 8, where it has God the Father addressing the Son as the God, ho theos. And so this is the contention. And so his rebuttal or response to that was a link to this article. And I've not been able yet to find a name to the author of this article. But nevertheless, in this video, we're going to be taking a close look at not only Hebrews 1:8, but also the surrounding context, as well as the background, the Old Testament background source for this text. And so, as I said, we're going to be taking a close look at Hebrews 1:8 because of the Unitarian propaganda online, which attempts to counteract the plain reading and the understanding of this verse and to ignore the surrounding context as well as the Old Testament source, which Paul quotes verbatim for this particular statement. Now, this material, this article, is somewhat lengthy, and it is jam-packed. It is full of claims, assertions. And so rather than just giving a summary rebuttal of the article, I'm going to walk through it section by section, reading it to you and responding directly to the sections. And in the attempt to keep these videos watchable, not overly lengthy in time frame, then it's going to take multiple videos to do this. So this will be part one of our rebutting the Unitarian position dealing with Hebrews 1 and verse 8. And so, as I said, we're going to, it's going to take multiple videos, but it's going to be worthwhile, I believe, in untangling the amount of error, the bias, the presupposition, and the self-contradictions that are jam-packed into this piece. And remember, as we pointed out, all that is necessary to debunk the entire platform of Unitarianism is to validate just one passage from the Trinitarian view, which we have already accomplished without question in all of the previous videos. And because we have so amply demonstrated already the false narrative of this false doctrine and established thoroughly the deity of Jesus as the Son of God, being of the same nature as the Father, and we've done this from several passages, then this is a glaring demonstration that all other texts that they touch must likewise be misrepresented. Again, this is just basic logic. And so the article begins, and the actual title of the article is The Trinity Delusion. All right. Well, they're entitled to their opinion. Of course, everybody has an opinion, right? And so the verse in the line actually is, but concerning the Son, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. Okay, and this is the particular translation that they cite, and I don't know which one that they cited because it didn't state which one it was. Excuse me. And so the article goes on, then it says, the claim versus the facts. The facts now, okay? All right, now, quote, the facts show that the Trinitarian interpretation and translation is impossible. It is the facts now. The facts show that it's impossible. Now, hang on to that. The facts show the Trinitarian interpretation and translation is impossible. And the writer is rather describing how the exalted Jesus, hang on to that, exalted Jesus, now has the authority of God's throne. All right, so we notice that just right out of the gate, the article says the facts show that the Trinitarian interpretation is impossible. Well, that sounds strong, doesn't it? Conclusive, definitive, right? But this is actually the first contradiction, and it's a big one. Because just a couple of sentences later in this very section, the author admits that the grammar does allow the Trinitarian rendering. So you can't call something impossible and then concede that it's possible. And so the fact here is that this is the first self-contradiction. All right, so let's go on. The next heading is the problems with the Trinitarian claim. All right, Hebrews 1:8 is a quotation of Psalms 45:6. Okay, they got that right. But there's a lot more to that, and we'll investigate that as we go. All right, so, quote, Hebrews 1:8 is a quotation of Psalms 45:6. The above translation that we just quoted of Hebrews 1:8 is another example of Trinitarian translation bias. Oh, you mean like when Johnny Barnes quoted Philip Harner out of context? And like when the Watchtower Society quoted Julius R. Manti out of context? That kind of translation bias? But I digress. Quote, here they outrageously try to claim that God the Father is addressing Jesus as, "O God," the God, okay? This translation crudely violates the context for the sake of Trinitarian tradition, end quote. But now, folks, remember that we've already demonstrated in our introductory video to this series that it is not until the late 2nd century that the Unitarian doctrine itself can even be found. So in other words, it is not an alleged Trinitarian interpretation that is a tradition, but it is the Unitarian denial of Christ's deity that is a human tradition. And so here we have the second contradiction. You see, the author says the "O God" translation, quote, crudely violates the context, even though, as I just read to you, the author has just admitted that the context is of the exalted Messiah. But the real problem is that Psalms 45 was recognized by Jewish commentators long before Christianity as messianic. Yes, the Targum explicitly calls the subject of Psalms 45 the Messiah. So, if the context points to Messiah, and the author has just admitted that it does, then calling him O God or the God is not a violation of the context, but it is an escalation of the prophecy. Now, here, Paul, again, if we allow that Paul wrote Hebrews, Paul quotes Psalms 45, verses 6 and 7 verbatim from the Septuagint here in Hebrews 1, verses 8 and 9. So, long before Christianity, this psalm was applied to Messiah, and even longer before the invention of the theory denying the deity of the Son, then the context of the psalm is messianic. All right, so let's continue reading the article. All right, so the next subheading in the article says the Greek grammar and intentional translation bias. So far, just in these few lines, we have the rhetoric of it's outrageous and it's a crude violation of the context. And then this is followed up with the assertion that this is intentional translation bias. All right, the article goes on and says, quote, concerning Hebrews 1:8, Trinitarian apologists are somewhat pretentious and would have you believe their "O God" translation is the only possible translation. So they always cherry pick the vocative "O God" translation for their apologetic agenda. However, Trinitarian Greek translation scholars openly admit the Greek grammar does indeed allow for a different translation. Trinitarian scholars admit that God is your throne, or your throne is God, is grammatically correct. And see Robertson and Westcott, for example. All right, end quote. And so in this paragraph, we have a veritable collage of contradictions. First, the author calls the Trinitarians pretentious for acting like their translation is the only option. But then he admits that Trinitarian scholars themselves concede multiple possibilities. If they openly admit alternatives, then they can't be accused of pretending otherwise. And so this is another contradiction. Secondly, the author says Trinitarians always cherry pick the vocative. And we'll go into the vocative versus the nominative, Lord willing, in the next video and iron that out more thoroughly there, a little more technical. But yet we see A.T. Robertson, a leading Trinitarian Greek scholar, even the one he cites, he specifically lays out both options in his word pictures of the New Testament. He writes, it is not certain whether ho theos is here the vocative or ho theos is nominative. Either makes good sense. So, folks, that's not cherry picking. That's honesty about the grammar. Thirdly, he alleges intentional translation bias, but then quotes scholars who openly say the alternative is possible. So you see, if this were a cover-up, they wouldn't publish an alternate possibility. So this is another contradiction. So again, just in these few lines, the article has contradicted itself at least 5 times. It says the Trinitarian translation is impossible, yet admits it's grammatically possible. It accuses Trinitarians of hiding alternatives, yet quotes Trinitarian scholars admitting them. It insists the "Oh God" translation is contextually absurd, and yet the Jewish tradition, which predated Christianity, already read Psalm 45 as messianic. And the author admitted, as I read to you, that the context is the exalted Messiah. And so it seems more than logical that because, quote, God, the quote, God is your throne translation is obscure and admittedly merely a possibility, that the author of the article is the one guilty of intentional translation bias. The fact that Trinitarian scholars admit the possibility is a blatant contradiction by the author in asserting that Trinitarians are guilty of translation bias. And I mean, this amounts to a little spoiled child having a spasm. Now, before we close this lesson, I'm going to read one more line of the article. And that line says, quote, some of these scholars also concede that it makes theological sense. This is also evidenced by, notice, by a review of various major translations. The RSV translates Psalms 45:6 as, your divine throne endures forever and ever. All right, so I'm just going to put this right here on the screen and let you look at it. Now, if you were paying attention, you noticed that I didn't include the Revised Standard Version in this list. And there's a reason for that. And right here's the reason. So here we have contradiction number 6. And the flaw of the author appealing to the Revised Standard Version's rendering of Psalms 45 and verse 6, when the same translation renders Hebrew 1:8 in direct contradiction of the Unitarian doctrine, and in harmony with the plethora of translations, many of which were major translations, that you just saw go across your screen. Now, to be transparent, as they say, there are a scant few translations that render Psalms 45:6 similarly to the Revised Standard Version. But for this author to assert this is also evidenced by a review of various major translations, that is a blatant, demonstrable falsehood, folks. And so, to summarize what we have seen so far, in just the first few sentences of this article, we've already counted a half a dozen contradictions. He calls the Trinitarian rendering impossible while admitting it's possible, says the "Oh God" translation violates the context while ignoring a Jewish messianic interpretation, accuses Trinitarians of pretending only one translation is possible while quoting them who admit multiple possibilities, says Trinitarians cherry pick, but cites Robertson and Westcott who don't cherry pick. Charges bias, but cites scholars who admit multiple options. Says Trinitarians crudely violate the context while admitting the context is of the exalted Messiah. Says a review of various major translations supports the Unitarian position when, in fact, the facts now, his cherry-picked Revised Standard Version translates Hebrews 1:8 in a way that flatly refutes the Unitarian doctrine. And folks, we're just getting started on this article. And so in the next video, we'll continue reading through more of this article and testing its claims and its assertions against the actual evidence and contextual exegesis. All right? So, thank you for your time, folks. And I pray that until our next scheduled video, God will bless you richly in your study of His Word. Wherever you're at, folks, have a good day. Thank you so much for your time.